Greetings from Stanford University in California. My great regret is not being able to be with you in beautiful Estoril, but I send warm regards to the Portuguese people on this, the 50th anniversary of the Carnations Revolution that took Portugal from dictatorship to democracy. I also send my thanks and congratulations to the Institute for Political Studies and to the Estoril Political Forum on this, the 32nd conference of the forum. And for all of you in the room, for all the supporters, all the donors, all the faculty, all the students, let me just say that there has never been a more important time in which we need the Estoril Political Forum. This is such a bright light in a world where democracy is threatened, where liberty is threatened. And if there's one message that I want to send to all of you today is please make sure that the Estoril Political Forum continues to grow from strength to strength in the coming years and decades. This is incredibly important. Well, to the topic at hand. Can democracy succeed in the Middle East? This is the question that has been posed to this panel. And I imagine that the question is not really focused on Israel, which is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, although it is also facing its own challenges. But the question is really, can the Middle East democratize? And the answer, sadly, tragically, in one word is no. In two words, absolutely not, because we live in a very different political and geopolitical moment, which I would like to address. So, if we look at the state of the Middle East on the eve of the Arab Spring, if we look at the Middle East at the height of the global democratic boom in the late 1990s, early 2000s to 2010, we see that this is a region in the world that has been singularly excluded from the global democratic boom. For decades, we have been talking about Middle East exceptionalism or Arab exceptionalism when it comes to the spread of liberal economic and political institutions around the globe. And we can see this also comparatively if we look at the state of democracy in the world at the height of the global democratic boom. Again, these are figures from about 2010. And we see that the Middle East really stands out as a region of the world where democracy, and certainly liberal democracy, has been very, very weak. And in fact, since the Arab Spring, the situation has only deteriorated. If we look to Freedom House's scores from the Middle East from 2011 until 2023, we see that what were already quite weak scores for freedom have diminished even further, so that the average regional score, which in 2011 was a mere 32, is today an even more depressing 26. So we have not seen the spread of democracy in the Middle East, despite the great initial hopes of the Arab Spring. And there is a large and long literature seeking to explain why that is, which I don't have time to get into. What I want to do is to focus on the geopolitical realities that we are facing in the Middle East today. And to understand that what is unfolding in the Middle East today is a contestation between what are increasingly two opposing axes. Let me begin with the axis of upheaval, or what Dennis Ross has called the axis of misery. Some people call the axis of mukawama, of resistance, or the axis of chaos. We observed that particularly over the last 10 years, a new alliance of authoritarian regimes around the world has coalesced. It is led primarily by Russia and China, Iran and North Korea. These are dictatorships, authoritarian regimes that share very little among them. Some are secular, others are theocratic, but what they have in common is profound dissatisfaction with a democratic world, a profound hatred for the West and for an American-led and international order, and an overwhelming commitment to disrupting and undermining the global order led by the United States and Europe since the end of the Second World War, and even more so since the end of the Cold War. What has happened over the last decade in particular is that we are no longer living in a post-war international environment. In fact, we are living in a new Cold War reality, which threatens to become a pre-war reality if this axis of upheaval is not contained and checked. We will very quickly find ourselves in an extremely dangerous global situation, hurling towards all-out conflict between these revisionist powers and what remains of the free world. That is the reality that we are facing, and the Middle East is one arena of contestation that is currently heating up and pointing to this broader geopolitical reality. The other two global flashpoints are, of course, Ukraine and Taiwan. And I'll remind everybody that world wars never begin, they never start as world wars. They begin as separate regional conflicts, which then merge into a global conflagellation. And in 2024, we seem to be heading in that direction with Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and Taiwan being the flashpoints for this dynamic. Let me also say, since I'm addressing an audience in Portugal, or what radical Islam calls Al-Andalus or Andalusia, is that not all members of the axis of upheaval are Islamist theocrats, but some of them certainly are. And in the worldview of radical Islam, all of Portugal, all of Spain is waqf. It is land that used to belong to an Islamic caliphate, and therefore under Islamic law belongs to that caliphate. And however long it takes, whatever the costs, the worldview of radical Islam tells you that all of Portugal and all of Spain will eventually be conquered and returned to the rightful owners, who are the mu'aminim, the believers of Islam. This might sound like a fantasy to you, but in the minds of radical Islamists, this is not a fantasy. This is a theocratic commandment, which it may take decades or hundreds of years to achieve, but it must be achieved. You often see maps of Israel being defined as land that has been stolen from the Palestinians, and You have here an analogy of how radical Islam views Andalus, Spain, and Portugal in this regard. So Israel's fight is not only Israel's fight. You should be aware that you are seen as being in the same camp of infidels as far as radical Islam is concerned. In fact, among radical Islamists, there is a saying that Saturday, after Saturday comes Sunday. In other words, once we take care of the Jews who believe in the Sabbath on Saturday, then we'll take care of the Christians who celebrate their Sabbath on the Sunday. So what do we do in the absence of the spread of liberalism and democracy in the Middle East? How do we deal with this rising axis of upheaval? Well, the answer is that we need to begin to bolster and construct an opposing axis, or what we might call an axis of peace and prosperity, or an axis of stability, in order to counter this looming axis of upheaval. And it will be up to Europeans to decide whether they join this axis of peace and prosperity, or whether they live in an illusion in which they think that they can remain neutral in this fight. In fact, that there may be some Europeans who would even want to join the axis of upheaval, as bizarre and twisted as that might sound. But this is a question for Europeans to debate. To counter the axis of upheaval, we have to understand, wake up, and realize what we are facing. Constructing an alternative axis, an axis of peace and prosperity, will not be a simple democracies versus dictatorship equilibrium. We should think about it more as an axis of pragmatism or an axis of moderation that will counter an axis of misery, of chaos, and barbarism. In the short to medium term, we really need to focus on three main goals, and I'll end with that simply because our time is so short. The first thing that an axis of peace needs to focus on is to end Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad control of Gaza. It is not only that Hamas has killed and raped and maimed over 1,200 Israelis, but Hamas and PIJ, and these are Iranian proxies based in Gaza, they have kidnapped over 2 million Palestinian civilians and are keeping them under conditions of captivity and oppression. Nothing is going to move. We won't be able to make any meaningful progress for a better future for the Palestinians as long as Hamas and PIJ remain in military and political control of Gaza. We also have to make sure that Hamas doesn't do in the West Bank what it did in Gaza, which is to topple the Palestinian Authority and take over the West Bank. If that happens, then we can look forward to many, many years and possibly decades of never-ending war and conflict in the Middle East. So we must make sure that that does not happen. But secondly, much more difficult and a longer-term goal has to be the containment of Iran. And this essentially has two main parts to it. One is to gradually degrade and destroy the ring of fire constructed by Iran across the Middle East, the proxies that Iran has nurtured in Iraq, in Syria, and Lebanon, and Yemen, and elsewhere. These need to be contained and gradually degraded and destroyed, ideally by persuading Iran to stop sowing chaos across the Middle East through these various proxies. Secondly, and very, very, very importantly, we absolutely have to be laser focused on preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Iran did not directly control the type of attack, the timing of attack of October 7th, but Iran has a deep vested interest in sowing chaos across the Middle East in order to try to disrupt the possibility of Saudi-Israeli peace. But more importantly, for the Ayatollah regime, the strategic goal, their ultimate strategic goal, which is to become a nuclear-armed power. And the Ayatollahs believe that that is their best insurance policy against regime change, both from the inside by the Iranian people, and the Ayatollahs are deeply unpopular by the Iranian people, but also as an insurance policy against external intervention. So the mullahs are doing everything they possibly can to become a nuclear power. If they do, they will remain in control of Iran in perpetuity, and they will become even more aggressive and audacious in their attempt to extend Iranian hegemonic control from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean and to annihilate the state of Israel, which they view as their rival in the Middle East. The Israelis don't see the Iranian people in the same terms. There's no symmetry there, but the mullahs of Iran are hell-bent on regional domination and on the annihilation of the state of Israel in that context. And that, of course, is something that the Israelis will never agree to. The Americans will never agree to. But unless we prevent Iran from going nuclear, we're going to find ourselves in a hellish regional and global situation where everyone, the Turks, the Saudis, the Egyptians, will rush to acquire nuclear bombs in order to protect themselves from a nuclear-armed Iran. And that will mean the end of the non-proliferation regime in the world. It would be an absolute catastrophe. And we are very, very close to Iran crossing the nuclear weapons threshold. That has to be prevented. Last but not least, we must build on the Abraham Accords to develop new regional cooperative infrastructure in the Middle East. We already have the foundations of that. We already saw that US Sunni Arab states Israel alliance in defensive action on the night of April 13th, 2024, when Iran fired 350 drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at Israel. We saw an amazing performance of this defensive alliance that has developed in the Middle East. We need to build on that. We need to create a US-Saudi-Israel security and innovation pact, which other pragmatic Sunni Arab states could participate in, which Europe could participate in. We need to finally achieve full normalization in relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That will be the end, in essence, of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It will open the gate to normalization of relations between Christians, Jews, and Muslims across the world. That's a very, very positive thing, something that the Ayatollahs are desperate to try to prevent as a Shia rival to Sunni Islam. And as part and parcel of that, we must work diligently to provide the Palestinian people with a realistic prospect for self-determination, for dignity, for freedom, but that will require them to demonstrate their ability to govern safely and responsibly. We must not create another failed state in the Middle East. We must not have a situation where a Palestinian state becomes a failed state, becomes another Gaza, where all international aid is directed towards terrorism and violence. There needs to be a Middle East stability pact that includes a realistic, detailed plan for the end of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, allowing the Palestinians to work towards self-determination and self-rule, but that has to be based on gradual performance-based proof of governance and the capacity of the Palestinians to govern themselves responsibly and safely, in the spirit of Salam Fayyad's plan for Palestinian statehood. The good news is that for the very first time, we have the prospects of a regional envelope, a regional structure that would allow us to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But that will only happen if we end Hamas's horrific military and political control of Gaza. We deny jihadists the prospects of taking over the West Bank, and we make sure that Iran cannot continue to act as a spoiler and to sow chaos across the Middle East. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all a very successful panel and conference.